Hello and welcome to another edition of the Irish Angle on Jump To It. This week there's just two of us on the show, myself and Johnny Ward. We were hoping to have AK Betts on again to give us a rundown of how he got on during Galway with his three pitches, but obviously he made so much money he's gone off to Portugal on me, so he's not turned up this week, but I'm hoping I'll get him on next week, all being well. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thanks a million, Vinny. Yeah, another Galway come and gone and plenty to talk about.
Yeah, plenty to talk about. First thing, I suppose, the weather was atrocious most of the week. Same for Goodwood, of course, in the UK. They couldn't even get through their 5 days, had to cancel halfway through Saturday. Galway got through all seven, despite a precautionary inspection Saturday morning. So the weather really was the big talking point of the week, but the crowds were still up on last year.
Yeah, the crowds were still up. I mean, the Racing Post is a piece today. I've been going on about the weather, but like it's really, really worrying. And like the figures from Goodwood last year compared to this year, compared to rain, it's so off the charts. And with all that said, like what Galway have done and what the likes of Ballinrobe have done, Vinny, to get ground like they can in the west of Ireland, given the wettest July on record. And Galway survived the whole week with one inspection, and the ground was nowhere near unraceable. So they've done amazing work. I have to give the track so much credit for the work they've done in terms of drainage and all that. In terms of crowds, Vinny, I mean, I think they did exceptionally well. It held up well across the week. It generally wasn't like the sort of biblical weather down there that you got at Goodwood. The day I was there on Wednesday, and it was actually grand. But the Galway has maintained the buzz. I think they generally do quite a good job with their kind of hype and promotion, and it kind of goes to show that the festivals are still pretty strong. That was the feeling I got from bookmakers as well going into the festival. Festivals are still strong. It's sort of the day-to-day stuff that's struggling, but Galway endures, and I'm delighted to see that it endures because it's not cheap to go racing, and I thought there was a great atmosphere there the day I was there.
Yeah, I agree. I was down in Galway Monday night as well. I thought it was very good too. Just looking at it now, the attendances over the week, they're up 4.8%, which isn't too bad. That's on 2022 figures. But for the first 6 months of the year, horse racing in Ireland say the average attendance is up 7.6. So it's a little bit of a drop off. Would you put that down totally to weather?
Not really. I mean, and also, the HRI attendance figures are the attendance figures in racing are maybe not in pinch of salt territory, but they're basically a lot of people are pay, don't pay any AIR cards, so jockeys and trainers account as attendances. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think Galway have done a good job. Like I know a lot of like really really big racing fans from Galway who didn't go to Galway at all. Like they just don't really go racing anymore. So Galway now has to kind of attract, I suppose, floating voters and stuff like that. And I felt they did well. It's 7 days is a long time. It kind of drags the Saturday and the Sunday for me drag a bit. And relating it to the 7% or whatever that HRI had in its figures wouldn't bother me at all.
Yeah, it's one of the few metrics we have, those crowds, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we can't really judge the whole industry on a whole lot else. I don't think. I think that the sales stuff that they push out and bandy this record sales figures. Now I really can't see how relevant that is to the actual racing and the product that they have as a racing sport. But anyway, look, we'll move on. Let's look at the racing itself. Monday, start off, first four favourites won, and teed up. Emmett Mullins wins the Connacht QR race, fourth favourite in a row on the day. It looked all over for the bookies at that stage. Yeah,
it did. Teed up's a good kind of example for me of like how do you actually train race horses? Like John Ryan, I'm in Mallow today. John Ryan will have a runner or two. By all accounts, he gallops his horses over further. You'll often hear other trainers say, we never gallop them together. We never put the gun to their head at home. We never do this. We never do that. We give horses 3 weeks between the races. So how then can Teed Up rock up to Galway? He probably should have won 3 times in the space of 5 days. He would have been favourite each time. How does it work? Like I genuinely want trainers to tell me, is it all crap that you give horses time between their races? Because Teed Up didn't look in any way fatigued on Sunday, having run Friday and having won one of the toughest flat handicaps of the year on the Monday. I wasn't sure about his stamina, Vinny. I tipped up Shajak in the race. It was one of my better tips in the big race this week. I had a poor week tip, and Shajak ran well, but Teed Up, I thought it was a really good training performance by Emmett. I really wasn't that convinced he'd get the 2 miles. And he did the job well, and kudos to all connections. But the thing for me is, like, how can you run a horse 3 times in 5 days, and then trainers tell us how you're supposed to train a horse? I just don't get it anymore.
Yeah, the old 3 weeks between runs is the standard one you're looking for as well, isn't it, during the flat season at least? Anyway, move on to Tuesday. I thought we saw a pair of serious fillies probably in the Fillies Maiden, Purple Lily, and beat a horse of Dermot Wells, Tanola. They were both well fancied, but the winner was seriously impressive, I thought.
The winner was, and I thought on the race itself, I'm just thinking now, this is one of the few bets I had this week, was I backed Aidan O'Brien's horse in the race, who looked very, very green, but I guess just Paddy Toomey's strike rate. He obviously has his horses really, really ready first time out, and this horse, as much as Purple Lily won by a neck, I thought she won snugger than that, and it was nice to see Dermot Well do so well on the week, Vinny. I know you mentioned in your blog, but like for the small enough runners that he had, winning the mile, then McCurdo, the next race 14-1, and then scoring with Livio Milo. This was like the old days here. DK almost having a treble 3 race in a row in Galway, and I thought that was a nice performance from Purple Lily, and probably not a bad maiden either. Like Aidan had a very well bred horse by Justify out of Clemmy, who looked green, but it still ended up to finish only 4th in the race. So I think going forward, this horse, she's by Calix actually. I know a friend of mine who bought her as a young horse to Breeze, and ended up actually losing money because I think Calix wasn't that hot at the time, and she ended up selling much better subsequently, and now she looks quite a valuable filly. So he's probably not feeling that nice this morning.
Yeah, but you talk about those trainers as well, how they do it. Emmett Mullins, like, God, he's some strike rate too, hasn't he? And Paddy Toomey, the pair of them. I wonder, did they train them exactly the same way, or is it completely different? But potentially completely different, I'd imagine. But yeah, some results they both get.
I thought that.
Sorry.
Emmett, like to be honest, Vinny, I thought Emmett was just using Willie's gallop, and I think he was for a while, but it was down his yard there around the National last year, and I think if people keep talking to you about your strike rate, and Ger Lyons would be in that strike rate bracket as well, I think you do protect it and cherish it a bit. And Paddy Toomey has a ceiling for his horses, or the opposite to a ceiling, where his horses have to be a certain rate to run at all, I think. But it definitely becomes a thing, and I think they cherish it. Their horses have to be almost perfectly right to run, or at least to be fancied, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Anyway, move on to Wednesday. First of the big races of the week. The Tote Galway Plate, Ash Tree Meadow. That was one you could fancy now, in fairness. A very good run in the race last year. Rider lost his whip, got hampered turning in. So they stuck Danny Gilligan on at this time. He's a fair little rider, isn't he?
Yeah, I've been a massive fan of Danny since I've been doing the summer circuit, really. And he actually got injured kind of... He's probably out for about 6 weeks, maybe 4-6 weeks going into Galway. And the timing of it really worked out for him, because... Don't underestimate, as much as everyone wants a winner in Galway, Vinny, for a person from Galway, it means an awful lot to the likes of me. And I could see from, Paul Gilligan, his dad, like he was very emotional afterwards, and Martina, the mother, like they've 3 or 4 kids that have either ridden or, point to points, or ridden at home, just ridden at the track. Danny's the most high profile of them, but I did feel looking at him during the summer, like he was claiming 7 at the time, and he's obviously losing his £7 claim now. But I just felt looking at him, this kid looks very, very polished and very chilled out as well, and not kind of prone to getting ahead of himself. And he just rode this. I mean, it's very hard to. You got to remember as well, he won the Connacht National on a horse for Gordon not that long ago as well. So he's kind of had a very good strike rate in these good handicap chases. But he probably got a relative solo up here, but it was a lovely, lovely ride, and it was just great to see. A Galway winner. It got a lovely reception. I think Gordon. You got to remember, Gordon got Jack Kennedy before he was even able to ride horses. I think he recognises talent, and he's gotten one here.
Yeah, true. Well, look, one thing then as we move on to the Thursday, where we have Zarek the Brave wins for the 4th time in 8 years for Willie Mullins to land the hurdle, and Gordon Elliott. That was the 4th time in 8 years he's won the plate. They really are dominating the 2 big yards, aren't they? I know Willie says, the word out of the camp is he doesn't really target the likes of Galway. Yes, he does. 10 winners, 61 runners or something. He certainly targets it, and he farms it ultimately. That was a very good race, though, wasn't it?
It was a great race. Like I think, like part of me wants to see the smaller trainer win the big races. Miss United for Mick Winters, for example, and the Galway hurling, the Galway Plate, when they won by a smaller yard, be it Pat Flynn or Liam Burke or one of these. It's great, and I think it's reflective of the industry now that, Willie can target this with a potential champion hurdle prospect down the line. Zarek the Brave got to defy the fact that he was a 4-year-old with a poor record in the race, but he obviously did have a little bit in hand. beat Jesse Evans, who isn't exactly from a small yard in that and all lead. My mate Mozzie, Gavin Cromwell, obviously Ikera Lynn, the stablemate of the winner. So it was the top trainers dominating. But I mean, this is a 270 grand race, and that has gone way up in terms of quality. So with the concentration at the top, Vinny, it's not surprising that they're dominated by the big yards. But I have to say, for Zarek the Brave, he was one of the best named horses at the Galway Hurdle, because I thought at one point he was odds on to finish third up the hill. My mate Mozzie, who had run so badly in the race last year, and it was interesting talking to Keane Quirk last week how excited he was and how his face lit up, thinking he was going to ride my mate Mozzie. And Gavin Cromwell doesn't actually have a great record at Galway. He's had kind of a lot of near misses, and you could, when the horse jumped the last, I thought this is the big one, and ended up finishing third. It was a brilliant finish to the race. And I suppose what the highlight for me was just how tough Zarek the Brave was. There are a couple of horses who really stuck their head out this week that I was thinking going forward that's going to stand them, and he was certainly one of them. And fairness to Willie, he's a 4-year-old winning the race. It's no mean feat for all that he had bit in hand.
Okay, well, one last thing about that Galway Hurdle on Thursday is the fact that one of the horses who pulled up in it was Brazil, and he comes out Friday and wins a flat handicap with Niall McCullough on it, which was fantastic for Niall. Niall, he's of my own vintage, one of the veterans of the weigh room, or the veteran of the weigh room, I'd say he is now, with the likes of Kevin Manning gone out of it. Fifth time he's won that race, which is astonishing. But what did you make of that with the Brazil?
Yeah, it was funny watching the interview with Niall then on the when they beat Teed Up. So many storylines there. It was funny watching. Niall did look like he'd aged a bit. It just almost like the race had taken a bit out of him. And like his son Scott has had a lot of rides as an apprentice. So see the two of them riding it's lovely, and they're just a sound family. And Niall is a real example to other jockeys how to just keep going. And you know, he actually, just watching the finish, like he didn't look like he was getting anywhere tired in Brazil. But this whole thing, the Brazil, issue, Vinny, I find this very unsatisfactory as a punter, and it would piss the hell out of me off if I backed this horse in the Galway Hurdle. He drifts all the way out, inexplicable drift really, when there was so much money for Glan, and then rocks up the next day, albeit without the headgear. They took off the cheek pieces and wins at 14-1. I'm not suggesting there was anything untoward happening here, but the explanations offered don't really, they wouldn't really hold up in court in terms of why the horse sort of improved his performance. And just another example of, like, say JP McManus in these big handicaps. Glan was, or Glan, whatever you want to call her, Glan was extremely well backed, having gotten in as a reserve. And I spoke to one of the owners of one of the Galway Hurdle horses the day before, who already knew Glan was getting in as a reserve. It was kind of felt like that it didn't help his chance to race. But anyway, like, Glan is a good example of horses that, for me, I think more needs to be looked into it. For example, when Glan ran in, I'm just looking here, Glan won at Fairyhouse in April of last year, rocked up at Punchestown 4-1 in a really hot handicap, and basically made a bad mistake throughout, but was travelling well. That was grand, pulled up. Then rocked up the following day in a race that the same connections won, drifted all the way out from 4-5-1 to 8-1 in a weaker race in a Punchestown. Completely inexplicable. There was no explanation for this. The vet reported afterwards that the animal had a wound to her left fore, so they did look into it, but it was kind of a superficial wound. And just horses like this, when they drift for no reason whatsoever, there was nothing to suggest where was the explanation for this horse's drift. Where was the explanation for Brazil running for drifting that badly and then rocking up and winning the next day? And I think people need to be better informed about these things, because if I went to Galway and it was my first experience of backing horses, and I went to the Thursday and I backed Brazil, and then I backed Teed Up the following day, I'd probably never back a horse again.
Yeah, well, like, just from my point of view, what I certainly think here is someone who went racing on Friday, they pay good money to go. Punters, like, it's the industry is built around punters. That's the bottom line. They go there on Friday, or they're watching it on TV on Friday. They've seen the horse pull up the previous day, or they read the form line to see it pulled up the previous day. There is no excuse for that. There's nothing. They're not being told anything by the stewards or by anyone at the races. There's no announcement to say this horse pulled up yesterday because of X, Y, and Z reason, and he's fit to go today. So ignore yesterday. We can carry on as if he didn't run yesterday, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I find it very unsatisfactory as well, I have to say. One thing,
Just to add there as well, Vinny, briefly.
yeah.
So, like Glan in Brazil, so you can say, well, they fancied one, they didn't fancy the other. I don't know what they fancied. They both of them pulled up, right? And I was talking to Paddy Roach after Sundial won at Kilbeggan. I fancied him out of the way with the drift at Kilbeggan. I was like, this horse is miles better than these. Very, very weak in the betting. Absolutely hacked up. Then he goes to Galway, ran no sort of race. I'm not suggesting there's anything untoward going on, but when you go racing, and fewer people are going racing regularly, people are not informed enough. There should be a constant thing on the PA. Right, this is the explanation for this horse's run the last day. Tell people who are at the races why this horse ran badly or what the stewards heard the last day, because there is an information gap for me.
Yeah, well, look, we're being told a lot of nonsense, as I wrote in my blog. Like, we're being told things like the rail was moved for some race in Galway and there's 6 yards extra that they have to travel. Like 6 yards in a mile or a 2 mile race. What difference?
Who cares?
Like, none whatsoever. Or we've been told that the race was delayed a minute because of broadcasters. We don't need to know that. But we do need to know why a horse pulls up on a Thursday and turns up on a Friday and wins. Anyway, I won't get too hot under the collar about it. We move on to Saturday. A few things Saturday. Aidan O'Brien had a double was the first thing, and Charles Burns landed a gamble in the bumper with Ray Barron, who had 3 winners from his 6 rides in the week, which is pretty astonishing. Horse called Fortunate Lighting. What did you make of Saturday?
Saturday was my best day of the week, Vinny. I actually bet very sparingly. I was working on the Wednesday, and I was kind of trying to keep out of the whole punting scene. But I actually, to be honest, now I wasn't missing out on much. But on Saturday, I had a nice double, Dragon Malta into Moncur, so I was delighted with that, and it kind of got me in profit for the week. So I basically didn't necessarily watch the bumper at the time, and I had to look back afterwards at Charles, like 11-1 into 7-2 on the show. And again, I mean, I don't know, this horse is owned by Philip McGee. I don't know who's punting this horse, whatever, but this is a horse that was 5th at Wexford at 11-2 in a 2.5 mile race, and had already run. So it had run 3 times, finished unplaced 3 times, and showed a bit of ability. And for Charles to train this mare peak at Galway and to land a gamble like that in what looked a hot race, it just shows the mastery of the yard, because it's not straightforward at all. Royal Hollow was probably well fancied in the race. The 12 Pins obviously had good form and won quite well as well, dropping back and tripping. She's probably not a bad horse, but it was a masterful gamble, I have to say. To pull it off in the show like that, 11 into 7-2, was some going.
Yep. And we move on to Sunday then. Teed Up wins again for the second time in the week, 3rd run as you mentioned already. And then the Ahanura handicap, no 4 in a row for Current Option. But Natalie Lupini's Dunham, 2nd run of the week. That's a fair horse, that Dunham, isn't it? Very consistent.
Yeah, and just another postscript of Saturday. Sorry, Portland. I couldn't get over the drift of the horse, and it actually even put me off in the end, and ends up winning well. So it just goes to show, you go racing, you get your probably 2-1 on the off on a horse that was even money, and you get your value. The Ahanora then, Vinny, I mean, I suppose one of the stories of the day were the Mountain On runners, and this race itself. What did we have? 16. We actually didn't have that many. Salt and Stall, who I thought was interesting in the race. I backed him on the Tuesday, and I know he probably wants further, but he did temperature. So it wasn't Ado's kind of best week for all that. He did a lot of play starts, but Dunham, Natalia Lupini, she's a fascinating character. She's a young trainer who came over here from Italy, and just looking at her strike rate, Irish Flat last 5 seasons, she's at 13%. Irish Flat current season, she's at 17%, and last season she was something similar. And she's training in Banbridge, County Down. So a young Italian woman training County Down, absolute like left field stuff. And she's flying it. Last season as well, she did really, really well. And this horse won well, and to do from gate 17, I thought it was a nice riding performance from Billy Lee, and good to see a trainer like that win a big handicap at Galway.
Yeah, one other big story from Sunday is a horse called Soul Pretender, which unfortunately got injured on the turn into the straight in a handicap chase just before the end of the race. But the rider, Robbie Gagan, continued to ride the horse. You're supposed to get off as soon as is possible, pull the horse up, dismount as soon as possible. He didn't. He finished all the way up the straight, and the stewards gave him a 50-day ban. That's some suspension, one of the biggest I think I can ever remember for the on-day stewards to give. I didn't even know they could give suspensions that big.
Yeah, I tipped Baron Collier here as one of my 2 tips, was around 20-1, beaten by a 33-1. JP McManus trained winner who seemed totally unfancied, 15 lengths clear of 3rd. So it was a frustrating end, and my tipping hasn't been great of late, so I could have done with it. But so the Soul Pretender thing was an add-on to me. I actually backed this horse today. He won previously, and Robbie Gagan, I thought he rode it very well because he basically let it stride on when it was there was a strong pace in the race. This was at Killarney. Robbie let it stride on. Price collapsed in running, and he really got it right in a horse that is quite strong. Without speaking to Robbie here, I completely defend a ban like this, Finney, because if you're continuing on a horse who's injured, that's an absolute no. And I don't know what Robbie. I'd have to talk to Robbie. I know he gave his kind of explanation to the stewards, but 100% like stuff like overuse of the whip. Even giving horses tender rides is nothing compared to the welfare of the animal, which is obviously where this ban came from.
Yeah, one last thing on Galway before we have a little quick talk about Goodwood is you were there on Wednesday. You didn't happen to see the Jam Man, did you, in the parade ring? I see that there was a Stewart's report on
I
that
didn't
one.
actually. I must.
It was led around by a young child in the parade ring, according to the stewards. They interviewed Philip Rothwell, who knew nothing about it, more or less. I was just wondering, was it Tubbs McNally? That was the question I was going to ask you. But
I have to say, this went over my head. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. All right, move on to Goodwood. As I say, they had atrocious weather all week, absolute disaster for them. But we saw some good performances. Highfield Princess was terrific, was one. But Paddington in the Sussex, what did you make of that?
Yeah, so I suppose if you were to back Paddington going into the race, the only concerns you would have for me was that he's as much as he likes soft ground, he may not want what was at that stage, I suppose, becoming heavy ground. And if you were to say after the race, Paddington is disappointed here. The one thing I said before the race was he has had a pretty tough time of it. He's obviously starting off weirdly enough in handicaps, but he's had a tough 3-year-old season, and maybe beating the filly the last day, beating a good horse in a really, really tough race against all age horses. Maybe it'll take its toll on him. And the one thing in the race, I was all against Inspiral, Vinny, because I thought the race would be a complete mess for her. There wasn't going to be a pace on. She's a frequent break misser. And I was thinking, this isn't going to work out for her. So you take her out, and maybe it didn't take an awful lot of winning. And he wasn't overly impressive. But this horse now is a stallion prospect. He doesn't have any sort of Galileo in him, so he can go with all the Galileo mares. He stays in mile and 2. He's extremely tough. He's progressive. He was relatively precocious. He's by Sayuni. I think he's gotten loads going for him.
Yeah, just what do you do with him now? As you said, he's had a very hard season, a long season so far, because he was out early in the season at Naas and everything else. So what do you do? Because he is a major stallion prospect. He is the stallion prospect for Coolmore at the moment.
Yeah, well, he wasn't until, or at least in theory, he wasn't until, we had that flop from August Rodan in the King George. And Aidan O'Brien, people will sort of say Aidan O'Brien says this or that because of, the Coolmore Masters and the stallion notes in the Irish feed and all that. But I mean, Aidan O'Brien, what he said earlier this season, I thought was quite interesting, in that he said the lads, as he calls them, they want to race the horses more, because if you send a horse to stud who's been lightly raced, you can't with much certainty say he has the robustness in him to implant in his stock that hardness that you need for racing. So we're going to run a horse a bit more. And Auguste Rodin has spectacularly failed in that he's had 4 runs this season, 1 impressive win, 1 unimpressive win, 2 absolute flops. And his run in the King George massively dented him as a stallion. So Paddington has now emerged as the sort of I guess the stallion going forward. They also have River Tiber, and they have one of the stallions that doesn't come to my mind this season, potentially out of this year. But if they ran him in the Champion Stakes, Vinny, a mile and 2, run him as he wants in the race. I'm not sure what's happened with the Auguste Rodin. Maybe he'll end up in the Arc or wherever he goes. That's the way I did the campaign with him. Wouldn't be too bothered about the Breeders' Cup. He said a tough enough campaign, but bring him to Leopardstown. It's a stallion-making race as well, the Champion Stakes, and a mile and 2 on what I presume will be nice ground if it ever stops raining. Perfect for him.
He'd absolutely certainly go to stud at the end of the season anyway, won't he? There's no way they'll race him on that.
Well, they have a gap, Vinny. Like, in fairness to them, they have a gap now where they have they've invested a lot in Mutton Bassett, who's getting the likes of River Tiber, and he's getting nice horses. But they, you see with them, they have like the odd Justify, the odd Dubawi, the odd Mutton Bassett, the odd Deep Impact, the odd this or that. But they do need their own sort of stallion to replace Galileo. And Paddington at the moment looks like he's good credentials. No, he's not going to be Galileo probably, but they need a stallion. So, yeah, and they need a stallion to go to all these Galileo bred mares.
Yeah. As well. Just one other thing then, just from Goodwood. We'd Quick Torn, Tom Marquand in the Goodwood Cup. I thought that was an exceptional ride. Now, maybe it was a case the others didn't go after him soon enough, but it really was some performance from him. He's a smart jockey, isn't he?
Yeah, it was funny listening to Martin Dwyer on Racing TV yesterday, just going on about a horse at the end of her race, and I do think we underestimate when a race is about to happen, the amount of things that can happen in it. It's like if you watch cycling, like, and the sprinters are set up for a finish, but so much goes on. Like, there might be a breakaway, the peloton might get lost, so much goes on. And racing is like that, where you have all these plans, the trainer tells you the horse is certain to keep things uncomplicated, and then you have what happened here with Quickthorn. And people were texting me afterwards, oh, the other jockeys should be ashamed of themselves. But I'm not a jockey, and I as a thinking with the non-jockeys, how would be thinking, I'm like, every jockey in this race, these are the top jockeys that are riding a Goodwood. They kind of know what's going on here, so they're not like alien to what's going on with the winner, but they're in a kind of a quandary themselves. And I fancied Emily Dixon in the race. She looked completely beaten, ends up getting up for second. But it was the brilliance, I thought, of Tom Marquand, who decided to kind of play tactics with everyone else. I thought it was a phenomenal ride. I'd forgive the other jockeys because I think it was desperate ground as well. It was hard enough to ride, I'd say, at Goodwood throughout the week. And he's a very good horse in his day. Another big win for Nathaniel as well. And I thought it was a phenomenal watch, to be honest, because I was wondering, I was thinking, sort of going around here, this lad has a bit of a solo, but if he falls back into the field, you're not necessarily surprised either. Fantastic watch.
Yeah. Okay, look, we finish up. Just, have you got one from the week in Galway, Goodwood, anywhere you think someone should watch out for the next day? From my point of view, the one I really do think is Purple Lily. In fact, the one that she beat as well, Tanola. I think the two of them will win next time out, wherever they go. I thought they were very good on the Tuesday. What about yourself?
I'm going to give... tell you what I'll give, actually. I'll give the Big Diane. I was in Hart Bar, Vinny, after the Derby last year. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
In where?
The Hart Bar in Kildare town.
I know all the bars in Kildare.
Yeah. So I'd never heard this bar before, but people were saying to me, go back to the Hart Bar. Came back into the Hart Bar, you literally couldn't move in the place. There were lads from like all over, and I started to talk to lads who were involved in football, and there were lads from Athy, and one lad was telling me he was involved in the Big Diane, and they were kind of Peter fighting so much this horse, and I kept in contact with them, and the buzz they got out of Galway. So I think this, if you look at him, considering his size, what he's going to be as a chaser, I think he's going to be a smashing horse. Can see him rock up at Cheltenham next year. And it was funny, I didn't hear of the Hart Bar until I was looking back in an interview I did with Martin Brassel years ago, and Martin Brassel said in the piece, this is going back a few years, he said, I'd be too quiet now. I don't really court owners. If I go for a pint, I go to the quietest place. So I go to the quietest place in Kildare town, the Hart Bar. It wasn't that when I was there.
No, it's all changed the last few years. The Hart Bar, for anyone who doesn't know, Kildare town has a square in it, and there's a load of bars around the square. But the Hart Bar is down heading towards the Tesco shopping centre, nearly at the edge of the town, and you go up a little laneway, and there it is on the side. It's only since COVID, as far as I know, that it's really kicked off as being a venue for people, and it gets packed out every weekend. I think there's 5 different sections to it and everything else. Anyway, good promotion for the Hart Bar. There you go. We'll be back next week, hopefully, and maybe we'll have AK Betts if we can get him on for a few minutes to tell us about what sort of turnover there was in Galway. It'd be interesting to hear it and what some of the big bets were. Anyway, Johnny, thanks very much for joining me, and thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you all again next week. Thanks for that. Bye for now.